Welcome to Radio Free South Africa. This is your host, Karen Smith. Tonight, my guest is Henri le Riche, a Boer, an Afrikaner, and a long time white South African. His family have been in South Africa for over 300 years. He is a prolific author and an untirable activist for the white South African cause. Tonight, what we would like to talk about is why there's still such an ongoing furore about who is a Boer, who is an Afrikaner, and who is an African. Welcome, Henri.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Karen, for having me on your show again. Much appreciated.
It's an absolute pleasure, Henri. Now, Henri, you are and rightfully could be called a Boer, but you classify yourself as an Afrikaner or a white African, and so do I. Now, I do speak Afrikaans, but I'm not from an Afrikaans family, although my father's family is Dutch. So, theoretically speaking, I should be much hated in South Africa because I'm English, and you should be hated by the Boer people because you classify yourself as an Afrikaner. Does any of this really matter today?
Definitely not, Karen. There are so many people in this country that don't understand our history, and especially the young people. I grew up as a Boer. My father was a Boer. He was a farmer in a small town, and I didn't know anything about the Afrikaners. I also read about them. And only after school, when I went to Pretoria to go and work, I found myself in the middle of Afrikaner Dom, as we call it,
Yes.
Afrikaner Center, and it was weird for me to fit in because it was different mannerisms, the character was different, and maybe even the accent was a bit different. But at the end of the day, the values were the same. We believed in God. We were patriotic. We loved our country. So, at the end of the day, in this modern era, it's just semantics. It's always good to know where you come from. And the reason I use the term Afrikaner is because that's the modern term most people use still. And a lot of young people don't know the history about Boer or Afrikaner. Many Afrikaners are actually true Boers, but because they don't know the history, they just accept being Afrikaner. And I've met a lot of so-called Boers that's really not even close to a Boer, especially if you know their history. Personally, my family's been in the concentration camps. I lost family in the concentration camps in the Boer War. I had family that fought as Boers in the Boer War. And I think I've got more credentials as a Boer than most of these so-called quasi-Boers of 1902
Yeah.
up to now.
Yes, but Henri, given the small number of white South Africans, your history is important for you to know, because for me it's very important for me to know where I came from. My mom researched our family tree back until practically Noah's Ark, so that we know where we came from and who we are. If that is important on a personal level. But given the picture of South Africa today, can we afford to be split into any more splinter groups?
No, we need unity, Karen. And what these small groups are doing, they're confusing people more, and they want to split up, divide and conquer. They're doing exactly what our enemies want us to do. Our enemies are actually laughing at us when they see some of these so-called white Boers or Afrikaners trying to confuse people into identity politics. Yes, that thing might work if you live in pits onder water in the Nevada desert in the middle of nowhere. Small things amuse small minds, and it's who you surround yourself with. These people surround themselves probably with other small-minded people, and the world is not very big for them at the moment, so it doesn't help us as a group for what we want to achieve on the long term.
No, Henri, it really upsets me that we have this incredible amount of infighting about who is who. For me, as an honorable white South African fighting for the cause of the white minority, should we not then also be fighting for the cause of the original South Africans, the San people? Should we not hold hands with them? And should we not also be looking at the Cape Coloureds, the original Malay slaves who identify as Afrikaans-speaking South Africans?
We should hold hands with these people because there are many people that support our cause. As Afrikaners, they family with us, they friends with us, and they share the same struggles with us. Lots of these people do actually support us with the farm murders that's happening, and they're actually saying, openly they don't agree with the government. Yes, people need to remember these people are also a minority. They're also castigated by the majority of their own people. We have to go back to, I'm going to go back to the Confederate war, or the Civil War in the US, because the Confederacy and America, the northern parts. And, there was many black soldiers that also fought in the Civil War for the Confederates.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you ever heard of this other guy. His name was Barnum and Hervey. He was a Confederate reenactor, and he dressed up with the Civil War clothing of the Confederates and used the flag. And he became known because what he wanted to do. He wanted to remember and honor the black soldiers that served with the Confederacy during the Civil War.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, he was killed in a car accident. He was pushed by 4 other black kids, driven off the road, and it's believed that these kids were part of the new Black Panthers. And, just many stories like these, people forget these things, that there are people that bled with us, that died for our cause, for our values. These people are our brothers. Yes, they're in a minority, but we cannot, push them to the side. And it goes for the same story in South Africa with the Griquas and the Bushmen and so forth. There are many people supporting us, but these people that only want to see black and white, I call them peanut brains, because their worlds are very, very small. If you live a bit and you travel a bit, and maybe it helps if you get educated, but you don't have to be educated. You don't have to be rich. I've met the best poor people in this world, the best uneducated people in this world, and I've met the most arrogant, ignorant idiots that's rich and educated.
Yep.
So those stuff shouldn't stop you at all. But it comes down to people, the values they can give you. You share things with people that have a common ground, interests, culture. I always say I would rather be friends with a Christian black man than an atheist white communist.
Well, Henri, for me, we are trying to wake the world up to the plight of white South Africans, but we are not the only ones suffering. And if some of the black populace are also waking up, there is that fabulous example of Solomon Shlango. He is an educated, incredible black man who writes all the time against the ANC. Now, for me, that man is a hero because the risks that he is taking as a black man living in South Africa, speaking out, his risk is huge. He could be neckless tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So why would we then not extend a hand to him and say, thank you for seeing the truth. Come and stand with us, please, and we will fight this thing together.
Absolutely right there, Karen. I've got many such friends on my Facebook, and I can see their posts and so forth. And I've got black friends also living in places like Pretoria, and they're very anti what's happening with these farm murders, and they're anti-Marxism, and they post these stuff. And, for me, it's amazing to see that coming from non-white people. But if you don't reach out and get people that you share the same values with and try and make friends, how are you going to build allies? You can't. You're going to become a small minority sitting in a little corner and eventually dying of old age. You need to reach out to people and you've got to make those allies. And there are many allies in South Africa. We are a minority, but we're not on our own. There are many people like us, but we just need to open our eyes and our ears.
Because for me, Henri, there are not enough white people to fight this battle. There are not enough. We are outnumbered 20 to 1 easily, if not more than that. I think we're 8% of the population, something between 5 and 8%. We cannot fight this battle on our own. So people like myself and yourself who are going out there every single day, writing, talking, trying to convince people of the worthiness of the white cause, the fact that whites belong in South Africa as much as the Africans. Now we've converted some of these Africans to see our point of view, to believe in us, and we just push them away. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense because we are perpetuating their story that the whites hate them and creating in them a hatred for us.
You see what some of these people do, Karen, which call themselves Boers and so forth, they're enforcing the stereotype by playing into people's hands and actually want to enforce the stereotype that we are a bunch of racist, narrow-minded hillbillies. That's what it comes down to. Yes, we've got a lot of our, lower class type of people here as well. But lower class doesn't mean you're not a good person or don't come from a good home. But when it comes to people, you really need to have an open mind. You need to understand other people's history, and you've got to have that openness to make friends. Otherwise, you're going to go lonely through this world. And we need our allies. We need the Bushmen. We need the black people. And I mean, like this one black guy posted yesterday on my Facebook when I said something about the Marxist that's using race to make white people bad. He posted it all over and he said this is what he was talking about the whole time. And this is why he will not support this black government, because this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to vilify white people and stereotype us in this ongoing thing as being racist. And that's the other thing, you get black guys like this, and then you get the white guys again. That's, you don't need enemies with some white people that so-called call them friends,
No, absolutely, Henri. So I would like you to go back a little bit into history, please, and explain how, throughout history, there are blacks who have fought wars side by side with us whites, and now we are going to throw them away, throw them into the dustbin of history, and not accept them as our brothers and our friends?
Well, one of the stories was Piet Retief in I think around 1838. That was before the Blood River event. Piet Retief went to negotiate with the Zulu king to buy some land. And the Zulu king said, okay, but leave your weapons outside when you come in. And when you go in, what we want you to do is go and get us some stolen cattle from a different tribe. And once you do that, then we will give you a piece of land. So Piet Retief and his commando party went out. They quickly retrieved the cattle, brought it back. And back inside the kraal, again, they left their weapons outside. And they had to sign the treaty, and they signed it. And then all of a sudden, the Zulu king just shouted, kill the wizards. And because they were unarmed, they couldn't do anything. So all the impies or the Zulu warriors killed these Boers, Piet Retief and his whole party. What they did was they left the women and children with their wagons a few kilometers away from this camp, and the Zulus actually started going there. And at this camp, the children, they had a lot of servants, and they had a lot of the kids had a lot of friends, the same black kids, colored kids, and so forth. And the whole party was wiped out. Women, children, a lot, and old people as well. And what's interesting about this, those Boers actually buried the children in one mass grave, no race, all black and white in one grave, mass grave. And that was that was very interesting for me to show the Boers were very open-minded people, and they over time things started changing. And when survival comes into play, then people start thinking for themselves. And then we got the Boer War. That was 1899 to 1902. We had a lot of backriders or agterryers in Afrikaans. These was the black soldiers that fought with the Boers. And many of these guys, there are lots of photos. If you go to that Anglo-Boer War group of mine, nearly 12,000 people, you can get lots of these photos. Really amazing stuff. And these soldiers would always check on the back to make sure when the Boers were fighting at the front, they were not surrounded or attacked from behind. And many of these black soldiers died with the Boers. And some of them became very famous, like M.T. Steyn, the president of the Orange Free State, had agterryer, and he saved the president's life once when the British tried to catch him. And then also later in the Boer War with the concentration camps, you had the white concentration camps and you had the black concentration camps. Now, in the white concentration camps, it's estimated 34,000 women and children, mostly women and children, died. And then in the black concentration camps, about 18,000. Now might even be more. Now you've got to ask, why was the black people put into concentration camps? Well, the answer is quite easy. Because there was such a big threat to the British. They were put in these camps because they were allied with the Boers. They were helping the Boers. They were feeding the Boers. They were fighting with the Boers. So they were a huge threat to the British. And that was a major obstacle for them and a major setback for the Boers when these people were put in concentration camps. Because once the wives and children were in there, off the farms, the backup would have been going to their black allies, which didn't exist anymore as well. And then moving forward, we had the First World War. We had our black soldiers fighting with us in Southwest Africa, I think, North Africa, and then again in France. They were mainly used as auxiliary troops to support the fighting troops, but many died as well from gunshot wounds, maybe getting to the line of fire or bomb shells or so forth. And then same with Second World War. Also had many black guys that paid the ultimate price to plant bombs, actually, to save the rest of the troops. And even then, they weren't allowed to fight with the rest of the white troops. And then fast forward again to the Angolan War, and myself when I was in the townships, we had many black soldiers fighting with us. And we have a long list, roll of honor, of black soldiers that died for our cause during apartheid, because they fought for the same values for us as a republic. They believed in the same God. They were westernized soldiers. And it was men, I know the men that I was part of, it was 3-2 battalion soldiers, and there were also recce, reconnaissance soldiers, which is your special forces like the American Navy SEALs. I was also special forces. The parabats fall under the recces. The recces are your highest of the special forces. And our officers was a sergeant major. It was also a black man. Our sergeants was black. Our corporals was black. And we, as soldiers, took orders from these men, and we didn't see their color. They were men of men, and they looked after us like they were our fathers. We trusted these men. We would have followed them everywhere we would have gone. If they said do something, we would do it, because We fought for the same cause, and we tried to make South Africa a better place at that stage, what we thought. And many soldiers, old soldiers, can contest of the bravery of these soldiers, these black soldiers. We were probably lucky in the special forces because a lot of other normal infantry units were only white. Because we were special parachute battalions, similar to the Rangers in America, our things worked a bit differently. Same as with the recce's, like the special forces, Navy SEAL type here in South Africa, which also had a lot of black soldiers. Now, these guys were highly trained. Most of them had finished their high school as well. And yes, many of these soldiers, all of them actually, were volunteers. They volunteered to be in the South African Defence Force. And many of them were Bushmen, Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, name it, all of the different ethnic tribes you get in this country. And again, I will add, they were a minority. And these people, they died for our cause. We cannot forget them. They were fellow soldiers. I don't have an issue with a white guy from a different unit that don't have the experiences we had in the parachute battalion or in the recce's, because we served with black soldiers. Most of these guys, it's quasi-boers and whatever you want to call them, is wannabes. Here in the military circles in South Africa, and you get them in the US as well, you get these quasi-marines, wannabe marines, and wannabe special forces guys. We get them here as well. They say they've been a parachute guy and they've been here, but they've never been there. But we know about them and we keep an eye on them. And if we find them, we put them on the wall of shame. And funny enough, a lot of these guys are also guys that never served with black soldiers. They've got ulterior motives. And again, the world for them is as small as a closet. They don't know much. And you can hear in the way they talk and in the way they see things, because life is not black and white. It's huge chunks of grey. What do you think, Aaron?
I totally agree with you, Henri, because the special forces in any country in the world are the best of the best. They are the creme de la creme of fighting forces. And these people must have been, the black forces must have been incredibly good to have been accepted into and gotten to those levels in the Defence Force during the apartheid years. I mean, we were suspicious of the blacks. We were scared of them to a certain degree. So for them to have gotten to that level of acceptance by our so-called oppressive apartheid government was an incredible thing for them. And they must have been wonderful men. And I agree with you that we cannot now just say that the world is black and white, and I refuse to have anything to do with black people, because you just can't do it. We are such a small minority. We cannot push away anybody who is willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with us and fight for a better world, which is what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, the thing is, there's so many good people out there, Karen, and the thing is, people want to, and you need to associate with good people. We want to make the world a better place. But there's so many idiots out there. You know, sometimes I hear people tell me, yeah, but I don't want to have children because the world is in such a mess and there's so many crazies out there. And you know what I tell them is, I want to have kids because I want to level out all the damn idiots with some good people. And I think that's what we need to do. I just wish people would open up their minds more. But, you know, it's one of those things you can't do. If you haven't traveled and you don't have life experience to back it up with, it's just, there's so many interesting people out there. And yeah, you know, I treat people the way I want to be treated, with respect, until you prove me wrong.
Yes.
Then you get another side of me, you know, and because I was a paratrooper, I believe in integrity. And the people that know me knows when I tell you I'm going to do something, I do it or I don't. I still find a lot of people, especially on the internet, They make fake profiles, they
Yes.
hide behind fake names and fake photos, but they got a lot of guts, I tell you. They would say anything they like and they will tell you just what they want. But I can tell you now, if we're in the middle of a battlefield, that guy will be the first one that runs away or cowers. I know those type of people. I see them here on the internet quite a lot. They're useless in real life.
Yes, those are the people, the keyboard cowboys, who have an incredible amount to say, generally attack the real patriots, have criticism like you cannot believe of any action that we try and take to help, but never stand up when it comes time to stand up and do something like the Red October situation,
Yes.
or anything. Go on a march, stand up and protect our statue of Paul Kruger. Where are those big mouth people? Where are they?
Yep. Sadly, even when the popo hits the fan one day, as we say in South Africa, these people that's hidden behind these fake profiles would want to come forward as they're very pro for your cause. Funny, we had these people in the Anglo-Boer War as well. The traitors among us, they would, I remember this one little tale that I read on that Boer War group of mine about this white Boer woman that was walking past a dead corpse. It was tied to a pole by the British, by a Boer fighter. And this Boer woman kicked this corpse, and I can't remember what she said. And this British woman that saw this said, if you don't have respect for the dead, at least have respect for yourself. And that really struck me because, these people will take out their own people. In other words, they would cannibalize their own people trying to do something just to show, but I'm not like them. I am different. And these type of traitors are quite a lot among us. But you know what? They don't have backbone either. Or mouth. Oh yes, got a lot of mouth, no backbone. I call them jellyfish.
I agree with you. And so from there, we need to talk about also the British, the English-speaking people who came from Britain, who fought on the side of the Boer, and who today, the English-speaking are not really accepted as white Africans because of the Boer War. But there were so many of them who were on the side of the Boer.
Oh yes, there were quite a lot. There was, one of our most famous English people was actually Emily Hobhouse. She was an English lady, and incidentally, she was also what was back then, she was called a liberal, and we, as you know, we in this modern society, we tend to hate the liberals. But just goes to show again, life is not black and white sometimes, that little bit of gray. And she came up for us, our women and children in concentration camps, and she made the world aware of the circumstances in these camps. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened afterwards. And we had Germans, we had Van Gogh's, the famous painter Van Gogh's younger brother. He died in 1899 in a firefight against the British. Some say he might have committed suicide, but we won't know. And then there was Graf von Zeppelin's, one of his family members, that also died in a battle. And as you know, Graf von Zeppelin is known for that the Zeppelin in the First World War that did a lot of damage over England. We had a lot of Germans, we had a lot of Australians. Sir Arthur Lynch was one of our most famous Australians that fought in the Boer War. He also started the American part of the Boer commandos. A lot of American cowboys and soldiers that came to fight with the Boers in the Boer War. And then we have the Scandinavians from Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and we've got a mass grave there in Northern Cape full of Scandinavians because they were cut off from the Boer lines by the British, and they were killed there. Who else? And I mean, we had
Irish. We had the Irish.
Irish, and that's the interesting thing. Also, the Irish, they also fell into the American commando group because a lot of the American were American Irish. And interestingly, they fought against the Irish that was fighting with Great Britain. And sometimes these guys would leave messages for one another in places they took over. You know, quite funny to read sometimes. These guys really had a sense of humor still back then. Well, okay, there was those guys. Yeah, quite. And I mean, you had the Scottish, even the Scottish, and a few Russians as well, Polish, all fighting on the Boer side. And you know, if you look at the surnames today, you know, but before I come to that, you know, these people, in my opinion, they didn't speak Afrikaans. Some of them did, many didn't. But I call them Boers, and I call them my brothers, because they died and fought for my values. And this is what people need to understand. And that's the same with black people. The few that they were, they fought and died for our values.
And
I call them my brother.
yes, Henri, absolutely. And we cannot now just write them out of history, or we are equally as bad as the ANC, rewriting history books so that it reflects what we want it to, rather than what actually happened.
You're right, Karen. The thing is, it's not just rewriting the history books. These people are working in the hands of our enemies. And our enemies are just laughing behind the hand at how all this infighting goes on. And especially people don't really know their history. They just know a certain flavor of history from their little cocoon that they've got. That's why I say, come and join my group. Come and see the photos. Come and listen to the stories there. There's historians on that group. You will learn something. Every time I think I just know everything, I still surprise myself because there's always new stories coming in and I'm always surprised. And I don't know everything. That's what I learned in life. And I love taking in the new stories and people's experiences and so forth. Because I know life is not black and white. I've lived in funny places and mixed with some interesting people from Alabama and the US. Huntsville, Alabama, Mississippi, Rhode Island, LA, Las Vegas, Manila, Cebu, and then Europe, Dublin, what are all these places? I've lived in the sticks. And you know, there's common denominators that bind people. And it's those values that you can look into people and you can form a bond with people. And that's the thing that you can go into a trench or you can go and fight an enemy because your culture is the same. You know, when you've got a culture that's similar, you tend to bind more easily.
Yes.
And some culture aspects, even minority, is the same and it crosses over cultural, racial, religious barriers.
Now, Henri, is it not the Freedom Front Plus that took the White and the San case to the Unrepresented People's Organization? Was it Freedom Front?
I'm not too sure if it was them. I think they might have. I think they might have gone by themselves because they saw what we did, and that's a good thing, you know, because we need allies. If we look at our history, we needed allies, and we could have gone on longer with the Boer War if we had allies and we thought outside of the box and not like narrow-minded little mice. Because, like the story I gave you earlier was with the rugby. Our strategy in rugby, and it is like we go on full steam when we start to play rugby, and I'm sure many listeners know what rugby is. It's similar to gridiron, just in a little bit different way. We play full on until the last 10 minutes, and it's like the opposite team changes strategy, and we are still keeping on the same strategy we started off with. And if you look at history, this is kind of similar what happened in the Boer War. We started with the same strategy, gentlemanly, with a noble instinct to try and win the war. And there at the end of the war, the enemy changed their strategy and started really fighting dirty. And we still wanted to fight noble. And we got our asses kicked. Maybe we would have got our asses kicked anyway, but we could have had that war go on longer if we made allies and we thought outside of the box.
Yes, yes, and that is where we need to be at today. Is not pushing people away who are persuaded that we are correct, that we have a reason and a right to be in South Africa. Those handful of other color people must be embraced and thanked for standing up for what is right.
Yes, the colored people or mixed race people, they're also a minority like us. We share the same language, and that's already a cultural common denominator as an ally. We share the same values, Western values, Christian values, and these people are closer to us than the majority of the black people. Again, I say majority because there are a minority of black people that still also fall into that group. But if we support these people, we already got one ally at the UNPO. We can go on to fight this fight for our independence. And if we support these people and they get independence, at least they will support us because they are nearer to getting their own land than we will. So that's why they are important to support, and that's why I support them and why we should support them. Because when it comes to strategy, our people, unfortunately, are not very good at seeing the bigger picture, having insight, looking at tomorrow. There's only a few handful of people, and we need these people because they are leaders, and we need leaders in the Afrikaner and the Boer grouping. And that's why we need to support these people, because it's strategy. It's seeing tomorrow at where we want to be, and to get there, we need to maybe go sideways and make friends here or do this there, because it's not going to be a straight line to where we want to get to.
No, it is not. It is not, Henri, because in the CODESA talks and also in the original negotiations for Rainbow Nation of South Africa, the Afrikaner was practically guaranteed the right to self-determination. But in 20 more years, nothing has come of that, despite many requests to government to now honor that agreement.
You're right, Karen. And the thing is, I was thinking about this whole thing, even the Boer War again. After the Boer War, we kind of got our, independence back, and we did have independence. And now we've got this democracy. Now, if you think about it, we had our black soldiers fighting with us, and we had our own republic. You can say, if you look at the Boer War, that instance was us, the Boers, that got what we wanted. Now we lost that, and this democracy is actually the black people and the British now that won, because this country is now the other side of the Boer War, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes, absolutely.
But even with this and what's happening at the moment, we can probably speak about it in your next hour with where we're going with this and what Malema is saying. And
yes.
But even then, I don't think this democracy is what we think it is, and it's not going to hold the way people abroad think it is. I think South Africa is going to be a totally different place in 100 years from what we know as now.
And if we do not stand up and fight right now, Henri, right now, together, not in our little splinter groups of Afrikaner, Boer, English-speaking, Xhosa, San, colored, if we do not join hands together with our allies who think alike, who want the same result that we do, if we don't do that now, I hate to think what South Africa is going to look like, and I don't believe only in 100 years. I believe that the next few years are critical for the
Oh,
future of white South Africans.
you're absolutely right, and I really hope looking at people, there are many people like us, open-minded, seeing the bigger picture, and wanting to make allies. And we do make allies, and we make good allies because we're good judge of character. And the people we choose has high standards because we have high standards.
Yes.
And sometimes it's a bad thing because you want to judge other people on your standards, but I'd rather stick to my own standards then. But I know there's many people like us, and I can only see good things happening if people continue to think outside the box and keep on associating with people of the same values and moral fiber. And a big thing that people need to have is the integrity part.
Yes.
Then we talk business.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I just love that, what you've just said. Because that lack of integrity covers keyboard cowboys, it covers the pariahs, the spies in our midst, it covers the infiltrators, it covers all of them. It covers those liberal white Afrikaners who are standing, not only Afrikaners, English as well, who are standing up with the blacks, demanding roads must fall, demanding fees must fall, demanding all these things that are so the opposite of what we need to happen. How can whites stand up and want to destroy their history? Are the ANC government not doing a good enough job of that?
I think they overcompensated how complex this economy would be and how difficult it would be to have so many nations. And then on that point, we are nations ruled by another nation. And it would seem the ANC is giving every ethnic person, which is a nation, a chance to govern the rest of the nations.
Yes.
So I don't know if it's a bit of a strange setup in this country because, yeah, I don't know if there's other countries like this, maybe the US in a bit, I don't know, because our whole democracy is apparently a copy of the American democracy in some way. But yeah, I don't even think. I think we totally lost the whole idea of democracy in that point. But I quickly want to tell you what integrity says on the dictionary, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
It says integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. And I want to add that doesn't mean being narrow-minded. And then number 2 is the state of being whole and undivided. Unity,
Yes.
unification, wholeness, coherence, cohesion, undividedness. So it's a lot of stuff going on with integrity. And I think a lot of people forgot what integrity means. You would even think integrity nowadays is a right-wing word, conservative and right-wing. So
Yes,
I don't know.
but if you do not have integrity, what do you have? Who are you? Who are you? And that ties in exactly with what I've said twice in this show already. If we, as white South Africans, do not stand with the Khoisan in their cause, in their fight for acceptance, then we have no integrity. Because they
No,
are, by our own admission, the original people of South Africa. Now, if we, who are fighting for self-determination, who are fighting for the right to exist, do not stand with them and fight for their exact same battle, then we have failed ourselves as human beings.
absolutely. And, it seems like, our moral fiber is just getting thinner and thinner as the world is just going more left wing and liberal, it seems. And, yeah, I really hope America, even though I don't agree with Donald Trump with everything, I know I'd like him to win just to balance off this absurdity that's going on around in the world, because I'm sure once he gets to power, and I'm hoping, and it looks like he knows what's going on in South Africa and elsewhere, he can change this ideology and bring us back to a bit of conservatism. All of us are open-minded. I want to use that dreaded word, maybe even liberal up to a point, but I would say most of us has that conservative side of us, and it's like an anchor with a chain on. Some chains are long, some chains are short, and that goes for your liberalism. I think some people, that chain and anchor is just not hooked onto anything. It's just going, and that's the problem at this stage in the world.
Yes, because in some areas we've been under attack for the Afrikaans language, for our religion, for our conservatism. And I just think that is very short-sighted, because those are the anchors which have always been the white South African anchor, is their religion, their language, and who they are. That is so much of who an Afrikaner or a Boer is their language and their religion. Now, if you're going to attack those two things, you are destroying the very basis of who they are.
Oh yeah, you can see Marxism has taken over, because even in South Africa, it's like it's worse now. Families just splitting up, girls just with children. There's no father figure anymore. The fiber of our society is just falling apart, and like some of the comparisons that was made between Rome's fall in the last few days or years, how it started with how the society just became, there was no rules anymore, and promiscuity and so forth. And I can see the same thing with our Western society, and it's really sad. It's because people, if you what you learned in the army, know your enemy, because if you know your enemy, you're better prepared. And many people don't know what Marxism is, and all these stuff, and that's why they just fall for it. And that's why we see the problems we see.
No, absolutely. But the Marxist, the New World Order, whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati, whichever of those things you believe in, they have had a very long-term strategy, and they are very, very clever, because we have not done the public relations that we need to do for our cause, and never have. Because why? Are we too stubborn, or are we too proud to put our cause out there? We have never done it, and we are suffering for it now. But the Marxists are good at it.
Yeah, and I don't know how many people know how it works, but I don't even talk about it anymore, because I think we just past the point of trying to teach people or trying to make people aware. Those of us that knows, and we know how to deal with it. But it looks like it's a snowball effect, and but eventually we'll come to a turning point, I think, and things will hopefully saturate and balance out again once we've gone to the extreme of the other side, or the dark side, I'd say.
But Henri, do we have time to allow that pendulum to swing from left to right again? I don't think so. I think that the powers that be have seen the danger to them and are escalating their attempts to destroy the world. And they want to do it quickly, because they know their time is almost up. And I worry that you said, those of us who know, and those of us who don't, well, they're just never going to. We need some of those who are not awake yet to wake up, because if they don't, there are not enough of us to fight this well-established, long-thought-out plan to destroy us all.
Yeah, you're right, Karen. Unfortunately, as humans, we like our little bubble, and we like to have our head in the sand, and sometimes, we only wake up when it's too late, and then we want to start changing things. And even then, when you wake up at the very last minute, when everything's burning, you still got a chance, I believe. At least some people need that extremity to actually wake up.
You think so, Henri? It worries me that it's already a bit too late. I see pockets of resistance in Europe right now to this influx of so-called refugees. I see people standing
Yeah,
up,
well,
and that is a
there's a
good
good
thing.
example, Karen. I mean, how many times were these people not warned about these refugees and didn't want to listen? Only when Europe started burning now with these refugees, then people start waking up. Sometimes a bit too late, but at least they're waking up.
I'm watching that with incredible close attention, because I think that if they succeed there in turning away these refugees, if the conservative, even nationalist people um, succeed in getting rid of these people, then there's a hope for the white South Africans. I feel that, because they will then turn their attention to South Africa and say, but wow, we should have been watching that, because these people have suffered for over 20 years. So I'm watching that very closely, and it is a very good thing that there are small pockets of resistance. But
Mm.
but the governments are not happy about that. And those people who are standing up are being vilified. They are being called Nazis. They're being called racist, Islamophobes, or all kinds of things. And the government is turning the full might of their power onto those people to shut them up. So it will be very interesting to see what small pockets of resistance can do.
Oh, yes. And we will see. I think it's going to come to a turning point. And like, another person, Afrikaner, said, Dan Root, and to use his words about, South Africa is like a canary in a coal mine.
Mm,
And
mm.
it is so, just looking at everything, it looks like we are just being used as social engineering to see how the West in our setup will respond if certain things happen. So we are being tested with all sorts of things. I mean, remember when the ANC opened our borders and the problems we're sitting now with, unemployment, xenophobia. I mean, and now and then all of a sudden all these refugees is on their way to Europe. It's funny stuff happening, and we are also always at the forefront, it seems, with these funny things that happen. And then it's got this awful outcome. And then Europe still goes and do it. I don't get it.
I don't either, Henri, because I and a number of other show hosts here in the US have said that South Africa was the blueprint for the rest of the world. And to a very large degree, they have succeeded with their plan in South Africa, because the media turned their backs on it, the world turned their backs on it, and the slaughter of the whites has continued with nobody jumping in to help or even saying a word about it. So to that degree, the South African experiment has worked. And the silence has continued. Nobody has come to your rescue. So, yes, it was time to roll it out to the rest of the world, which they are doing very successfully right now, because those white nations in Europe are overrun. There are towns where there were 100 inhabitants that have had over 1,000 refugees settled in their town. Now, how can you expect those 100 inhabitant taxpayers to support an influx of 1,000 people and not be totally overrun? It's unbelievable to me what is happening.
Yeah, it is. And yeah, no, it's just white people in general as well. I can't tell you how dismayed and sad I am to see my own people in the disarray and leaderless, and just the families breaking up, and the pregnancies. I don't know. It's disheartening, and of course then we have a government. It's a black nationalist government that's not looking after us as a minority, we've got to look after ourselves, and we depended on organizations like AfriForum and so forth. But that's not enough. We need more than that. And the long term is we need our own piece of land. If
Yes,
they
we
give
do.
us a piece of land like the Indians in America, we will be very happy. Put us in a reserve. Yes, please.
Hold that thought. We're coming up to an ad break. We will be back.
Sure.
You're
All right.
listening to Radio Free South Africa with your host, Karen Smith, and our guest tonight is Henri le Riche. We have discussed now our black allies, our assorted British, Irish, German, etc. allies. I think it is only just to devote the second hour to those people who are not our allies, those people who are making life in the new rainbow nation of South Africa an absolute hell for blacks and whites alike. Welcome back, Henri.
Thanks, Karen.
So, Henri, what I would like to do now is to just give a general overview from Nelson Mandela forward of how the blacks who were not our allies have destroyed that once beautiful nation of South Africa. But I think we need to start with Nelson Mandela because that was where the original terrorist bombings started. And the world has a totally skewed perception of who he was. And although I've spoken about him many times on our program, I think this is an excellent time to start with him. So,
Yes, the thing is, yeah, he was incarcerated or put in jail because, as you know, about the instructions he gave for the Church Street bombing, and I think they found landmines that he put somewhere, lots of arms and so forth. So he wasn't put in there, and he didn't want to swear of violence as well. So if you want to negotiate, you've got to swear of violence, and I don't think he wanted to do that.
no, he didn't. And if you match what he did with the Burumach today, now who are sitting in jail today. So you take any group of people who wants to overthrow the government. Now, if Nelson Mandela was an absolute man of peace and this iconic saint that he is now made out to be, why are those Burumach people not also saints and heroes?
Yeah, I think with them, they want to show us now that as a black nationalist party, they're in power. And it's a way of showing us who's boss. That's what it comes down to.
But Henri, if we're really honest about it, any country in the world would have done the same thing to Mandela, and they would have done the same thing to the Burumach people, because it is treason to try and overthrow the government of the day by force. You cannot do that. So how does the world, you see, I don't understand how a certain person can be an absolute hero and this icon of peace, and yet if someone else does it, exactly the same thing, for exactly the same reasons, they are terrorists and deserve to be in jail. I don't understand the world view that can see it that way.
Well, I think it comes down to the social structure sometimes of the people or the majority, and it would seem to me sometimes the majority or the popular opinion of the day depends or give the standard for what's wrong or right. But yeah, we live in a time of double standards and hypocrisy, and I think, in the future, generations are going to look back at this time, and that's what we are going to be known as, age of hypocrisy.
Absolutely, because there are definitely throughout the world, not only in South Africa, there are dual standards for everything. And it would appear to me that anything that the whites say, do, or want to be is wrong in today's world. And it doesn't matter what country you live in. Whites are racist, whites are bad, whites have got privilege, whites have got all kinds of things. Simply to be
But
born white is wrong.
yeah, but if you look at how it all started and how it spread like a virus. I mean, it all started here with us, and the rest of the world was up in arms against the white racists here, and and now we all cured, laugh out loud,
Mm.
and now this race virus has spread to America and Europe, and now those whites are the racists, and many of those guys probably supported the downfall here. But I saw earlier 13 schools was burned down in Limpopo
Yes.
just this week. During the days of apartheid, it was burned because of apartheid. That's the story that was sold abroad. And then when apartheid came to an end, everything was hunky dory, problem solved. But meantime, all these necklaces and all these burning and protests and whatever that happened under apartheid is now still happening under a black government. So what really changed? Nothing.
No,
The
and
media just went out and now they're not reporting on the story, and the guy sitting in the US and Europe is thinking, so the cause was fought and it's resolved and everything's now right. No, it's not. Still going on. It's just the perception that was planted in your head. That's all.
absolutely. And the fact that there's such silence from about South Africa still to this day amazes me, because that country, there is so much happening in it, especially this year, so much happening that the world should be alight with news stories from it, and yet there's absolute silence. I don't understand, because unless we are correct in saying that it was the blueprint for the rest of the world, and it can go up in flames and the world will be quiet because it's a good experiment, unless that is the absolute truth, there is no reason for the silence. We talk about
No, there's no need. No.
you see every day the stories about the refugees in Europe. Well, why are we not talking about the murders in South Africa? It doesn't make any sense, because it all ties in together.
Absolutely, and it's just we live in this age of political correctness. People have more sympathy, or more, they would listen more to your story if you show sympathy about the black refugee than the white farmer. Because if the white guy talks about the white farmer, it's already thought you think the other guy thinks you're a racist. I mean, we are living in such silly times if you think about it, because this is how far political correctness has taken us. It's just a huge form of social engineering. That's why, I don't think even in 100 years ago we see this type of engineering the way we see it now, because now we've got the TV, and people make programs or directors in such a way to draw your form of thinking into a certain direction. Now, some of us can maybe think both sides and maybe be critical of something, but I would say the majority of the people out there are just a bunch of sheep. They just sit in front of the TV, and you can see this imaginary person with a little teaspoon just feeding them. And that's all. They
Yeah,
can't think for themselves. They can't be critical. And maybe it's that left right brain thinking pattern. If you can, some people are born to actually be critical and think that way, but most of people are just happy to go on with a little bubble. Don't tell them the truth, because if they just hear the nice sugar-coated story, it makes their life easier, and it's easier to conform from a government perspective. We just let you conform, we tell you what you want to hear, and you're all content and a nice little boy and girl, and you don't do anything, and you just jump when we say jump.
it's scary, isn't it, Henri? It really is scary, because if you look at the education our children are getting today, they are getting a very wrong view of history. They're getting taught to be ashamed of being white. They, it's absolutely horrifying that from the age that they first go to school, they're being indoctrinated and don't know how to think any differently because they're not taught to think at school.
That's right, and I even see it here in South Africa with my own people. That thing about critical thought. It's kind of non-existent. You've got a lot of you don't get many people that would ask questions. It's just easier to accept what was said on the news is the truth. I mean, if you're really a truth seeker, you go and seek the truth. You make an effort and you go and look it up and you look deeper and you try and find out more and you speak to people. You speak to different types of people. You can speak to the left and right group to get different ideas. I used to, when I was a kid, my parents would buy the Afrikaans Sunday newspaper and the English newspaper, and that kind of thing stuck with me when I went to buy newspapers. Sometimes I would buy a newspaper I don't normally buy just to see what they're saying. Again, what I said earlier, sometimes it comes back to that old thing about know your enemy. Know what they're on about. Know the angles they come up with.
Well,
you can think about it. You can think of an argument to come. Mm-hmm.
I follow the Sowetan.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's very interesting to see the black viewpoint on things. So I read the Sowetan every day.
I myself, yeah.
Because it's very interesting to see their take on something that's happening. But nobody trusts the media anymore. I mean, any right-thinking person. I mean, there was a poll taken in the USA a week ago, and they say that only 6% of people trust the media. Even Fox News, our most conservative, so-called conservative TV station, is losing viewership at a rate of knots because nobody trusts them anymore. They lie, they get caught out in lies, and there's no consequence for it. So,
yeah.
So unless you are totally brain dead, you know that you have to look elsewhere. And you have to look at least 3 stories to get a particle of truth. So you have to look at the right-leaning, the left-leaning, and a liberal, middle of the road to kind of just judge for yourself what is the real truth of that story. Because they all tell it differently.
Yeah, the media today is. It looks like they're also just trying to keep a dead horse going because people are catching on to them, and even with, like you said, with Fox News now with with the whole Trump story, I think they lost a lot of support there, and good, I think these organizations and houses need to be brought up to the open for people to see what's going on, and hopefully people do see that. I think maybe in the 80s when the whole anti-apartheid movement was going on, I'd like to think people are now more clued up and they can actually see the lies and things that was told to them. I would hope so. More so than the people in the 80s. I mean, the people in the 80s didn't have the internet we had. And, but then again, you can take a horse to the trough, but you can't force him to drink the water.
Yeah.
And that's the same with people, unfortunately. If some people like the truth and they really want to see if something is true, and then other people, or most people, just accept everything as the truth.
Yes.
And that's... Yeah, and in the form of democracy, what type of democracy is that? You've got people that want to know the truth. They might know the truth if they found out. And then you've got the majority of the people, because they're the majority and they're just happy to believe anything they want, they're the ones that's beating the drum of where everybody's going. What stupid democracy is that then? And democracy is really just a big farce.
Yes, and that leads us to the meteoric rise of that young firebrand Julius Malema. Speak to me about Julius Malema.
All right, just this, as the elections is coming closer, America is also on big elections, so are we in South Africa. So Julius Malema is a Marxist, and the organization is a Marxist, and he's known for his red overall and his red beret. because, like, I think Che is one of his role models. And
Yes.
of course, he went to visit those Chavez when he was still alive in Venezuela. So, and like true Marxists, he started showing his Marxist colors last week when he said, President Mugabe, not Mugabe, President Zuma is not our enemy. Now, President Zuma is the president of South Africa and part of the ANC Congress, the party founded by Nelson Mandela. Was he part of the founding fathers or something?
Yes.
So Malema said, Zuma, the president of South Africa, is not our enemy. The white people are our enemy. So that already, tells us where we're going with these elections. And I mean, that makes it a bit worrying because it's said that Malema, not by pundits or anybody really, but more like maybe by his own propaganda minister, says he's going to be the new new president of South Africa. So you can imagine where that's going to put us as a minority of whites in South Africa if Malema becomes president. And then, of course, he said he's going to take away all the land in South Africa that's owned by white people, and white people had it coming and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, if Malema and his cohorts of, what can we call them? I wouldn't even call them revolutionaries. They're wannabes. Want to try and take anything away. It's not just going to be about taking. We're not Zimbabwe. We're at least 4 million white people here. It's going to take some taking from our dead hands to get anything out of our hands. And then, even then, there's going to be a few fistfights. But let's see what happens. This election is going to be very interesting. I still think the ANC is going to win. They're going to lose votes. If the worst case scenario, they might have to make an alliance with somebody. But the next election will probably be more of a deal clincher. But I think before the next election in 2019 happens, I think we're going to see some fireworks.
I believe that as well, because Malema seems absolutely hell-bent on a civil war. Now, I don't know if that's just rhetoric or if that is really what his plan is. But, I mean, he has loudly stood up and said he really meant that they will take the ANC out with the barrel of a gun. So one has to wonder where South Africa is headed. And is he headed for jail, the same as Nelson Mandela and the same as the Boeremach? Is he headed for jail for treason?
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. Once again, the hypocrisy will come out with how the majority depends who should go to jail or not. But yes, the ANC wants to take him, wants to accuse him of high treason, was it?
Yes.
But yeah, we will see if he goes to jail. My hunch is he will probably not go to jail. And then again, just this week, was it yesterday, the EFF, his party members, was escorted out of the parliament by security.
Again.
Because they started shouting. Yes, so I also believe, these guys, when a Marxist tell you he's going to take you by the barrel of a gun, from history, you tend to learn to take those little threats quite serious. And these things that happen in Parliament, I believe they're testing the whole system. They're testing this government. So, but, how would you take over a government? What if you say, all right, I've got 20,000 supporters outside of Parliament and everybody just storm it? Is that taking over a country or Parliament if you can do that? I don't know. It would be very interesting.
It is interesting, but also extremely scary for me, because his politics are so far left that it's absolutely frightening. I mean, everything that he believes in has been proven to be a failure in the rest of the world, and yet he is still set on that path. socialism and communism does not work, has not worked anywhere. But he is absolutely set on that path, and he has enough disaffected young black South Africans behind him to make a splash, if nothing else. So I'd like to talk about that as well, because we talk about how the ANC have affected the whites. Now, yes, we talk about the whites because they are a terribly squeezed minority, but the black majority has been marginalized and made poorer by the same ANC government that they keep voting for.
Mm. Yes, and I can see the poverty among black people. It's just a certain group of black people in a certain category that do job jumping, actually, because what they do is we've got affirmative action, and then we've got black economic empowerment, and companies, large corporations, need to have these quotas that they need. So what they would do, from what I understand, you have a black guy that you need for your company, so you give him this huge salary. He comes and works for you, and then there's another company that now he needs a black guy, so he makes the salary much more bigger. So this guy just goes to the next company to fill up that quota because it's reserved for a black guy. So you just get these black guys getting richer and richer and richer. And I see a lot of poor people struggling. And, it's good people. There's really good people out there, nice people. It still keeps the integrity. And they're struggling. But, a lot of these people will still go and vote for the ANC again. It's because of ignorance. It's because of the other thing, hope. People hope, now with the next election, they will come to me and build me a house. I want to say it's that stupid ignorance kind of thing, And then that said, I see a lot of black people speaking out against this because a lot of black people are getting angry and they say, these black people are staying poor. You're not doing anything. What are you doing? Maybe it's time for you to give somebody else a chance. But the poverty is getting more. And with that latest move by President Zuma that devalued the rand, 2016 is going to be a very hard year for work, finding work for people. And, if you still have a degree, you're kind of all right because you're still in a different league. But if you're just somebody with high school, oh man, you've got a huge problem in this country because that's the largest pool of unemployed people. South Africa is steadily being taken back to the state of looking like the rest of Africa. At one stage we could have said we're a first world country, but I can see steadily we're being Africanized. And you want Africa to go forward. You want Africa to go, better itself and become a first world continent. But, there was, what's all these places, Botswana, Namibia, all these other places. There were colonists and white people. And then every time something happens, the white people move to the south. Now, we are the very bottom of the south. So either it's into the sea, abroad, or to a place like a homeland or Orania. So, yeah.
Now, Henri, I'd like you to talk to me about self-determination because I worry that there are three things against it. That the ANC have so far refused to discuss it. That the ANC are not going to want to lose their tax base because, as far as I understand it, 85% of the taxes are paid by the remaining employed whites, so they're not going to want to lose that tax base. And the third thing is, of course, nationalization, because if you got self-determination, would you then still fall under the ANC government, and so they could take it away from you at any given time? Could you talk to me a little about that?
Somebody mentioned to me this week that we might have to change the constitution if we want to have self-determination. I don't know how true that is. On the current strategy that we're trying to work. So I don't know. It's a hard one. With with the UNPO, that United Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, where a lot of minorities belong to, I think that's a good bet to strengthen our position to get self-determination. But it's about educating people, and not just abroad, but even the people among us, because this type of idea is sold as right-wing or outdated, and it really is not outdated. It's quite, I want to use this awful word, progressive. It's very open. It's very it's a future, insight, and all those things that you can associate with something enlightened. Because I mean, some of the people that's part of the UNPO is from Assyria, Brittany, East Turkestan, Iran, Iraq, Kosovo, Namibia as well, the Basters, the Afrikaner Basters from Namibia, the people from Taiwan, Tibet with the Dalai Lama, Tibetans. Yes. Yeah, and West Papua, and then you've got the Mapuche from South America. So yeah, people should go and check out this site, and the Afrikaner belongs to this, and hopefully the colored people will join us soon as well, because then, as we've said earlier, we need these allies. The website is unpo.org, Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. And in the constitution of the UNPO, they will say it is your right as a minority to have self-determination, to determine your own language in your school books, to speak your own language in your territory, and so forth. But I mean, there's many, Orania, we've got Orania, and there's a few other ones going on as well. But I know Orania is trying to, they've got another initiative. I don't know if it's official with Orania, but they're trying to populate the west coast of South Africa now. And I've also bought 1 hectare in that area. You know what? And I might not even live there one day, but like I said, 100 years from now, South Africa is going to be a whole total landscape. If I have kids or whatever, that's going to be populated maybe one time or another in South Africa. Because as Africa moves in, we as a minority moves out, closer to each other, and they're just pushing us back. Eventually, I think we're going to all end up in a place where we're going to feel safe, and it might be there, or it might not. We'll see.
So, Henri, I'd also like to speak to you about a whole bunch of other initiatives. There are a lot of them happening at the moment. A lot of Boers went to Zambia and are farming there. Some went to Georgia. Now, there are some initiatives. I spoke to Nick Griffin on my show the other day. They are trying to get Poland and Belarus to accept white South Africans, because those countries are, the white population is shrinking. So they need to repopulate their country to get the economy kick-started. Now, what do you think about that? Because there are so many South Africans that say, we are Africans and we are not leaving. We are going to stay here. But if it becomes impossible for them to stay there without being murdered, do you think that these initiatives are a good thing? Do you think that enough people in South Africa will grab hold of the opportunity, or do you think we're just going to stubbornly stay and be killed?
Well, it's good to have a back door, and it's good to, when you have those options. And yes, those countries do use our farmers, and they want us because we are good commercial farmers. We know how to farm. But also African countries want the white farmers going to work there, and these guys has gone up to places in North Africa.
Hello? I think we've lost.
Blood. We've been here very long, but
Okay, so we lost Henri for a moment there. I've got him back online. Henri, you were saying we've been here for a very long time.
yes, and Africa is in our blood, and but I think we need to stick together as a community. We can still reach out to other people, but Africa is not on the level of Europe or the US yet. Minority rights is not respected this side, and like we've seen with the xenophobia and so forth, and albinos, black albinos, they don't live very long because in Africa, minority rights, I would even say, is a white man's invention. So until we're not on that level, we stick together, we help Africa go forward, and but for long-term survival, we need to help ourselves first before we can help other people because we are small minority. And if we don't, we're going to totally be assimilated into nothingness.
Yes, because the whole world will be coffee colored soon. If things go the way the powers that be want them to go, because it's being said that you're a racist if you do not breed with other colors, etc., etc., etc. I mean, there's so much going on; one can't keep track of it all. So essentially, the white race will die out because we are not breeding at the rate of others. I mean, Mr. Malema himself said recently that the blacks must have more children. More children. Good grief. Good grief.
Now, why do you think we love using to say white privilege? We are privileged. But have you ever thought, why are we privileged? I mean, if you're going to have only one child or two children, yes, you've got more money to do things and you will be more privileged. But if you're going to have 8 and 12 kids, you're going to struggle. You're not going to be so privileged. So maybe if you come down to the basics of that 1 or 2 kids, you might get further.
Well, absolutely, Henri. And if you come back to what you were saying earlier, that there is no family unit. I mean, that was one of the first things that was destroyed was the family unit. If you take even the 50s when I was born, if you had problems in your marriage, you sorted them out and you stuck together. Divorce was rare. But nowadays, you don't even get married. You just have a dozen kids by a dozen different fathers, and then wonder why do not have any of this privilege. So, yes, the white people used to have very large families because huge numbers of them died, but nowadays you have 1 or 2 because you know that's what you can afford. You want the best for your children, so you know you cannot afford good schools and good universities if you have a host of children. But we are doing ourselves a disservice by doing that because we are declining in numbers. I mean, you see it all over Europe, that the white numbers are declining. They have whole villages standing empty simply because we are not reproducing enough to keep the numbers up.
Yeah, you're right. And, it could be that pendulum thing again. They talk about white supremacy, all that nonsense. And what do you want to replace it with? Black supremacy? Because it looks like that's what some of these people want or groups want. And even some of these helpers, these white helpers of these extremists want black supremacy to reign. I just don't, I'm not sure where these people think they're going to fit in. Like the EFF, like Malema, you have these white, even Afrikaners, that's actually supporting Malema and say, yeah, there's not going to be any peace in this land until we give the land back to the black people. Now, I don't have land. I never had land. I'm struggling just to buy a place. But I can tell you, if they think they're going to take land from my friends or so on, and there's many of us that's also going to not just sit still. So it's not just going to be about taking. And hopefully we don't get there, because this government, this black government, is holding on to a lot of land that they bought over, and government land. But they're pushing this narrative that the whites is still keeping the land. The whites are willing to give extra land if they have too much land. But, like good communist propaganda, and I mean, these guys got good training in the old USSR, they playing the people, locally and abroad. There's many sites. You can even go and Google some of the sites that can actually explain to you in detail who's got the most land, what percentage, where, and so forth.
Yes.
But it all depends who's in the media, what their personal agendas are, and yeah, it's just a matter of lifting your finger and doing a bit of homework. But we're living in strange times, really. Most 99% of the stuff we hear out there is just garbage. It's just the type of news they want us to hear. But coming back to Malema, he is, all these guys are in conjunction, all these Marxists holding hands worldwide, and they're trying to help each other. And it's scary to think, even with with the Black Panthers, new Black Panthers that came to South Africa. I know these guys set up satellite offices in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. I would hope our security intelligence service, I don't have too much trust in them, is actually checking out these things. But if my hunch is right, I think they'll probably be more worried about the white danger to black nationalism rather than farm murders and all these black nationalists killing us.
And I'd like to talk about that as well, because the farm murders have been in the spotlight, hopefully in a good way this week, because the police have agreed to prioritize farm murders. Now, for years now, they have not reported on them. They have not even categorized them into farm murders or white murders or anything like that. So they have agreed this week, I think it was Vryheidsfront again, Freedom Front Plus, who went to them and had a meeting with them yesterday, asking them to please prioritize and report on farm murders. Do you think that this time, after so many attempts to have this happen, do you think that the state is possibly serious about it this time and that they will do something about it? Because with the drought, plus the farm murders, plus the land redistribution, South Africa is going to have no food in no time.
Yeah, Karen, I think, the election is coming close. So, it's all nice to hear this. But it's funny that it's done now before the election.
Mm-hmm.
So the proof will be in the pudding, as we say. So we'll see if anything comes of this. It's hard to tell so early. But then again, like I say, the election coming up might be a hint why this happened all of a sudden.
Yes, absolutely, Henri. So my thought on that is they have many times promised to do something about it or to take it seriously, but every time they've come to the conclusion that there's no racism involved and it's ordinary theft. Now this time they have at least said that the amount of violence used, etc., is disturbing. But as you say, the elections are coming up and many promises are made. And there, as we know, promises are only made to be broken. So I don't know if it'll help at all. But the farm murders are very troubling because they have escalated this year. I don't know whether that's also leading up to the elections. And it's frightening to me to see the rate at which this is happening, because the drought has already devastated the farms. And these new land redistribution laws are going to devastate them even further. So who is going to provide food for South Africa and Zimbabwe? Because Zimbabwe is finished. They are starving.
Mm. Yeah, food prices are going to go up. So who's going to feel the pinch again? the poor people, they're the ones struggling. So you can just imagine what's going to happen if we still had this drought that was going on, because rich people or middle class people could go and buy water, but if you in the middle of nowhere, and you were used to getting water from your river, and now your river's dried up, then where are you going to go and knock for water? So it's just we can see where all this is going, and it is worrying, as you said. The farm murders, we'll see where this goes as well, and the thing is, they're not keeping any tabs on the amount of farmers being murdered and then the races involved. So it's hard to tell what's really going on. We pick up stuff in a newspaper here and a newspaper there, and then those things don't really tally up with what we are being told by the government. And because we know they don't follow this anymore. So it's how can you fix a problem if you don't have proper statistics to follow to get a result? I think because this is a black nationalist government, they are quite sensitive to the idea of how the world perceives them, and they love playing the victim card, still from the apartheid time. If these things become properly recorded, it will show a different picture to the world of not victims, but aggressors. And I think they are very scared of this. They want to keep the victim perception going, because if they say we put this racial law in, or we extend affirmative action, or the white people is like this, then people won't question it because they don't know the seriousness of farm murders.
Yes, because I read a report when the crime report came out from the government last year. I read a report side by side from the mortuaries. Now, the numbers that the mortuaries report are more than double what the state is reporting. So where is the truth in any of this? If you give
it's hard to filter through the truth, Karen. I told you, it's like you can just accept that 99% of the stuff is just half truth and lies that we're getting. We're not getting the whole story.
Because
and
the government is saying there are 49 murders a day in South Africa, but the mortuaries are saying they're more like 94 murders a day in South Africa. So,
because now apparently homicide or where a family member kills somebody else or something like that's not part of the 50. That's what they do.
Oh.
That's that's how they break these things up to try and make it look, not as bad as it really is. But it's really, the people say it's closer to 100 a day.
Because the mortuary report said 94. Now, I'm more inclined to believe that because they actually have a record of the bodies going through there. But if you then put on the death certificate that they died of natural causes, there's no way to track anything anymore. There's absolutely no way. So yes, we say 4,000 farmers have been murdered in the last 21 years, but how do we know? How do we know? Because
that's why I say you can take on the government with its figures, because they've got to refute you. And just because they said it's 4,000 doesn't mean it is 4,000. Prove it. What if some of the names are just not on there?
No, and people who died later, if they didn't die directly in that attack, they died a year later from injuries, they are not counted because that is died of natural causes.
That's right. That's right.
So we cannot say these figures that are bandied about by all of us, I admit, 4,000 farmers, 90,000 whites. We don't know, and we never will know what the true figures are. There is no way of knowing, and that is shocking.
Yeah, and I wish an organization would take on these things. Yeah, AfriForum is counting it, but they said over 4,000. But it also depends what you say is a farm attack. In their definition, a farm attack is on a farm, not on a small holding next to a city, for instance. If you get killed there, then it's not a farm attack. Then it's just a murder.
And even there, the murders are not quantified properly. One just doesn't know, and it's so hard to try and report on affairs, South African affairs, when you have to every time qualify every statement you make. This is the number that we are given, but I can't justify that number, or I can't prove that number, or I don't know if it's correct. How does one then report on it? I find it so difficult, Henri, because I say, yes, we believe 4,000 farm murders, but we don't know. And then that casts doubt on everything that you've said. Because if you're reporting
Mm.
but don't know,
You see,
how correct are you? What
yeah,
are
I
you
mean,
doing?
you just take the ones at face value that you might accidentally come across. But yeah, no, it's difficult. I mean, they dispute our figures and we dispute their figures again. And yeah, I believe also if we had a hate crime law, it will put things into perspective. And this government is afraid of putting in a hate crime law because it would paint that uncomfortable picture that they don't want to feed to the world. And then the roles are changed around. But, it only like the Boer War, for example, concentration camps, only after that things kicked in. And I think with these farm murders, at some point in the future, when we look at the bigger picture, then only will it kick in and what really happened during the time we lived through all this. It's funny how people never realize the extent of the problem or the seriousness while they're living through that. And I mean, there's so many atrocities and bad things happening during these times during with this government, but they're always focusing on the past that happened there and the past there. But we're living through now new atrocities, and nobody's taking that on.
Absolutely, because the apartheid. All right, Zuma said last week, I think it was last week, that we are still fixing the problems caused by apartheid. But apartheid lasted approximately 40 years, from 1948 to 1988, when it started being dismantled. The ANC government has been in power 22 years. So tell me now, when are they going to stop using apartheid as an excuse?
Uh, can you ever, I can't see an end in that, like good people that's indoctrinated with victimhood. I can't see an end to that unless, they come to some awakening and say, see how, take an example from us whites, that you can take the good from the past and or you can build the future on it. Don't take the bad from the past and build the future on it. That's what Paul Kruger, the famous Boer president, said of the Transvaal Republic. And then that's precisely what these people do. They're building on the victimhood. When I lived in the Philippines, I lived with very, very poor people. And the population was 80 million there. It's double our size in South Africa. And, it struck me how poor these people were. And they had that one thing that the black people seem to take for granted in South Africa. And that is this infrastructure built by white people.
Yes,
And if
yes,
only those people in the Philippines had that, because it's a kind of a place you can live off. At least there's jobs there somewhere, or you can get money there somewhere. In the Philippines, there's no such thing. You're dead poor. And those people are like 100 times poorer than the poor people in South Africa. But they don't walk around with throwing ash over themselves, and their government don't tell them, but you're the most done-in people in this world. eventually you start believing all this nonsense and
Yes.
you get an internal sense of entitlement. And that's precisely what's happening in South Africa. When you get this entitlement idea, you become an eternal victim. You can't even help yourself. It's always the other guy's fault and the other guy that's got to help you out of your mistakes. The world don't give a damn. Hopefully things will change, but it should get worse first by the looks of it. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, on that note, we've come to the end of the show. Thank you very, very much, Henri, for your insights into what is happening in our beloved country. And I hope to have you on again soon with some better news than we have been able to report recently. Thank you and good night.